The email arrived at 6:12 on a Thursday evening, while I was standing in my kitchen peeling potatoes for one. The subject line said, "Transition plan for Dad." I thought maybe my son had finally sent over the schedule for fixing the west fence like he'd promised. Instead, I opened a 7-bullet email from my own boy and his wife, telling me it was time for me to accept the next season of life and move into a senior apartment across town. They needed the main house, they said. The garage apartment was limiting their growth. The farm was basically their future anyway. And then came the line that made my hand go still on the mouse. "Dad, stop squatting in our inheritance and making us feel guilty for wanting our turn." I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not loud, not crazy, just one dry little laugh that came out of somewhere deep and tired. Because, friends, there are moments in a man's life when pain finally stops feeling like pain and starts feeling like permission. I printed that email before the potatoes even finished boiling. The next morning, I removed my son from my trust, shut down every credit account he and his wife had been using under my name, called my attorney, and had a notice served on the garage apartment before lunch. But let me back up. Because no father wakes up one morning wanting to put a legal notice on his own child's door. You don't get there all at once. You get there inch by inch, swallowed word by swallowed word, until one day somebody calls your life their inheritance while you're still standing in the middle of it breathing. My name is Harold Mercer. Most folks call me Hal. I'm 68 years old, and I live outside Franklin, Tennessee, on 12 acres that my hands know better than my face knows a mirror. I wasn't born rich. I wired houses for 41 years. Churches, grocery stores, school additions, barns, lake cabins for people with more money than sense. I spent most of my life crawling through attics hot enough to cook a biscuit and under houses where spiders had more rights than I did. I learned early that electricity doesn't care what you meant to do. It only cares what's connected, what's overloaded, and where the current is allowed to run. People are not so different, though it took me most of my life to admit that. I bought my place in 1994 when my son Luke was 5. Back then it was nothing but a sagging white farmhouse, a rusted tin barn, and a field full of Johnson grass tall enough to hide a tractor. My ex-wife Brenda said I was buying a money pit. She wasn't wrong, but I loved it anyway. I replaced every wire in that house myself. I jacked up the back porch, rebuilt the kitchen cabinets, planted pecan trees along the drive, and turned the old machine shed into a proper workshop. Brenda and I divorced when Luke was 17. No dramatic betrayal, no big movie scene, just two people who had grown tired of disappointing each other. She moved to Knoxville and married a dentist. I stayed on the farm. Luke went back and forth for a while, but this place was always the place he came home to. He learned to ride a bike on that gravel drive. He broke his arm falling out of the hayloft. He carved his initials under the workbench when he thought I wouldn't see. I saw. I kept it there. Luke was a good boy. I need you to understand that. He wasn't born selfish. He had a soft heart as a kid. He cried when we had to put down our old hound, Roscoe. He used to save half his Halloween candy for me because he knew I liked Bitto honey. When he was 15, he spent 3 weekends helping an elderly neighbor rebuild her chicken coop and refused to take the $20 she offered him. That's the boy I kept seeing long after the man had started behaving like somebody else. He married a woman named Marissa when he was 31. She was pretty in the polished way of people who know exactly how they look in photographs. She had a marketing certificate, a sharp little laugh, and a way of calling me Mr. Mercer that sounded respectful the first few times and like an insult after the first year. I tried to like her. I truly did. She made Luke feel important, and a father will overlook a lot for that. She talked about vision boards, brand identity, passive income, all the modern things that make a man like me feel like he walked into the wrong meeting. I didn't understand half of it, but I nodded because Luke was smiling. They rented a townhouse in Murfreesboro at first. Then Marissa decided they were wasting money making somebody else rich. Then Luke left his steady job at the insurance office to help her launch what she called a mobile luxury pet spa. That was a grooming van as far as I could tell, but she had a logo made and started calling herself a founder. The van was used. The payment was not small. Their credit was thin. Luke called me one evening with that careful voice grown children use when they're trying to sound casual while asking for something heavy. "Dad, would you consider co-signing? Just to help us get started. We'll refinance in a year." I should have said no. A lot of you are saying that already. I can hear you, brother. I can hear you, sister. But at the time, he was my only child, trying to build a life. And I had the kind of credit a man gets from 40 years of paying bills before buying toys. So I signed $28,000. I told myself it was a bridge, not a burden. For a while, they seemed to be making it work. Marissa posted videos of dogs wearing bandanas, Luke drove the van, and I saw less of them than I wanted but more than most fathers get. Then the van's transmission went. Then Marissa said the market was shifting. Then Luke picked up consulting work, which seemed to involve a laptop, 3 unfinished notebooks, and a lot of coffee. By the time they asked to move into my garage apartment, they were behind on rent, behind on the van, and behind on life in general. The garage apartment wasn't fancy. 1 bedroom over my workshop, small kitchen, bathroom with a shower stall, windows facing the pasture. I had built it years earlier for my mother when her knees started giving her trouble, though she only lived there 7 months before she decided she preferred my sister's place in Alabama because my sister had cable in every room. Since then, I'd rented it now and then to apprentices from the electrical union. Luke said they needed 6 months. Marissa said, just until we reset. That word should have warned me. People who say reset often mean they want somebody else to pay for the consequences of the last version of themselves. Still, I said yes. I did one smart thing. Maybe the Lord had a hand on my shoulder that day, because before they moved in, I called my attorney, Nadine Price, and asked her to draft a simple family occupancy agreement. No rent for 6 months. Utilities included. No business operations from the property without written permission. No alterations. No claim of ownership. 30-day termination by either party. Luke looked embarrassed when I handed it to him. Marissa looked offended. Is that really necessary? She asked. It's just paper, I said. Good fences make better Thanksgivings. Luke signed, Marissa signed. I filed it in the metal cabinet under my desk, behind the tax records and the title to my truck. The first 3 months were almost pleasant. I'd see Luke in the mornings, and we'd drink coffee on the porch. Marissa washed her van in the driveway and waved at neighbors like she was campaigning for something. Sometimes they came over for supper. I made pot roast, cornbread, beans from the garden. They complimented the food, and I let myself believe we were becoming a family again in a new shape. Then little things started changing. Marissa asked if she could park the grooming van closer to the outlet by my workshop. Then closer became always. Then my own truck had to sit in the gravel turnout by the pecan trees because her van needed brand visibility from the road. Luke borrowed my zero-turn mower and brought it back with the blade bent. He said he hadn't noticed. Marissa moved my mother's rocking chair off the porch because it didn't match the farmhouse aesthetic she was building for her social media page. I found it in the barn under a tarp, sitting beside a bag of fertilizer. She started calling the place the Mercer property instead of your dad's place. At first I corrected her gently. It's my place, honey. She'd smile. Of course, you know what I mean. I did know what she meant. That was the problem. By month 5, the grooming van was broken more often than running. Customers started coming to the farm instead. I'd be eating breakfast and see strangers pulling up the drive with poodles and sweaters. Marissa had set up a folding table under my carport and hung a sign from my fence without asking. Paw and Polish by Marissa. I reminded her about the agreement. She sighed like I'd asked her to read the Bible backward. Hal, it's just a few clients. We're family. There it was. We're family. A phrase that can mean love, or it can mean, please stop noticing that I'm stepping over the line. I told Luke that night I didn't want a business running from my property. He rubbed his face, looked tired, and said, Dad, she's under a lot of pressure. Can you not make this harder? That hurt more than Marissa's sigh, because Luke knew better. Luke had watched me build that carport. He had helped me pour the footings. He knew there was nothing just about strangers driving over my septic line. Nothing just about using my electricity and water and insurance risk, so his wife could keep pretending her business was thriving. But I let it go. That was on me. I let a lot go that year. The 6 months passed. They didn't mention moving. I mentioned it once and Marissa started crying. Luke said they were close to stabilizing. I gave them 3 more months, but this time Nadine told me to send an extension in writing. I did. Marissa called that hostile. Luke said I was acting like a landlord instead of a father. I said, a father can still keep records. He didn't like that. The disrespect got bolder after that, not louder. Loud would have been easier. Loud lets you slam a door. This was quieter. This was my coffee being replaced by flavored pods I never drank. My mailbox key disappearing because Marissa was expecting business documents. My shop radio turned off because it bothered her client calls. My garden hose left running all night. My house thermostat adjusted from her phone because Luke had connected everything to some smart home system I never asked for. Then came the Lowe's account. I had a contractor credit line I'd kept open for years. Good discount, no trouble, paid monthly. Luke was an authorized user from a bathroom repair he'd helped me with the year before. I forgot he was still on it. He and Marissa did not forget. The first charge was $482 for shelving. The next was $1,900 for flooring, then lighting, paint, a commercial wash tub, a tankless water heater, a cabinet package Marissa described online as our studio renovation. Our studio, above my workshop, on my property, with my credit. I called Luke over that evening and laid the statements on the kitchen table. He looked at them and went pale. Marissa got angry instead. Anger is easier than shame for some people. We're improving the property, she said. You should be grateful. It raises the value. I looked at Luke. Did you think I wouldn't notice? He wouldn't meet my eyes. We were going to tell you, he said. When? He didn't answer. I shut the account down that night. Not all the way, because I still needed it, but I removed Luke as an authorized user. That was the first breaker I flipped. Marissa didn't speak to me for 9 days. Those were peaceful days. Then one Sunday after church, I came home to find 2 cars I didn't recognize in my drive, and a woman in heels standing in my side yard taking pictures of my house. I asked who she was. She said she was a realtor friend of Marissa's, just helping them think long-term. Long-term. I walked up the stairs to the garage apartment and knocked hard enough to make my knuckles sting. Luke opened the door. Why is there a realtor taking pictures of my house? He looked past me into the room, toward Marissa. She came to the door holding a coffee mug that said CEO. Hal, don't overreact. We're exploring options for when you decide to downsize. I haven't decided that. You will, she said. Not cruelly. That was the strange part. She said it like she was telling me the weather. I looked at my son. Luke said, Dad, be reasonable. This place is too much for one person. I was 67 then. I still climbed ladders. I still split firewood. I still changed my own oil. But that wasn't the point. The point was that they had started discussing my life as if I were not in the room, even when I was standing in the doorway. That afternoon, I drove to Nadine's office and told her everything. She didn't interrupt. Good attorneys listen, like they're laying boards across a creek, one fact at a time. When I finished, she asked me a question I wasn't ready for. Hal, who has authority if you become incapacitated? Luke, I said. She took off her glasses. And who inherits the farm under your current trust? I looked at the floor. Luke. She didn't say I was a fool. I appreciated that. We spent 2 hours changing documents. My medical and financial power of attorney went to my younger brother, Ellis, a retired state trooper who had never once asked me for money. My trust changed, too. Luke would no longer inherit the farm outright. The house and acreage would go into a scholarship trust for students entering skilled trades unless I changed it later. Luke would receive a separate account, not small enough to be cruel, not large enough to reward what was happening. I didn't tell him. Some people call that sneaky. I call it refusing to leave loaded wires exposed. After that, I started keeping everything. Photos of the sign on my fence, screenshots of Marissa's posts, using my property to advertise, utility bills, credit statements, text messages, a copy of the signed occupancy agreement. I didn't know exactly when I'd need it, but I knew the circuit was heating up. And then came that email. Transition plan for Dad. There were bullet points. Of course there were bullet points. Marissa loved bullet points. She wrote that senior living would give me community. Luke wrote that the main house would let them expand operations. They had already toured a place called Maple Ridge Commons. They included the link. Studio apartment, 1 bath, meals included, no workshop, no garden, no dog over 20 pounds, though I didn't even have a dog anymore. They wanted me out by October 1st. They offered to help me sort my belongings. My belongings, in the house I had spent 30 years paying for, repairing, and waking up inside. Then that line, "Dad, stop squatting in our inheritance and making us feel guilty for wanting our turn." I sat at my desk for a long while after I printed it. Out the window, the pasture was turning purple in the last light. A pair of deer stood near the fence, still as church candles. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator humming and the old wall clock ticking above the doorway. I thought I would feel rage. I didn't. I felt something cleaner, a breaker tripping before the fire. The next morning, I met Nadine at 8. By 9:15, she had read the email twice and said, "They put it in writing. That helps." "I want them out," I said. "Good," she replied. "Then we do it correctly." That was important. Friends, listen to me on this. Don't let anger make you sloppy. Sloppy feels good for 10 minutes and costs you for 10 years. Nadine prepared a termination notice under the agreement they had signed. 30 days, no business activity, no alterations, no contact except in writing about move-out logistics. Then I called the bank about the grooming van. I was still co-signed. There were late payments I hadn't been told about. I requested formal notice of default risk and began the process to remove myself, which meant they had to refinance or bring another qualified guarantor. Then I called the supply house and froze every charge connected to Luke or Marissa. I called my insurance agent and told him a business had been operating on the property without authorization. I called the county clerk and asked what permits were required for a commercial grooming operation using water discharge on residential acreage. I wasn't trying to ruin them. I was removing my name from the things they were using to ruin me. The deputy served the notice that afternoon. I did not serve it myself. I was done standing in doorways trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding me. Luke called 17 times. I let every call ring. At 7:40 that evening, he texted, "Dad, this is insane. We need to talk like family." I wrote back, "Family doesn't plan to remove a man from his home by email. All communication goes through Nadine." Marissa emailed Nadine the next morning, copying me. She wrote that I was emotionally unstable, that I had been influenced by outside legal voices, and that Luke had an equitable expectation in the property as my only child. Nadine replied with 12 words. "Your expectation is not ownership. Please refer to the signed agreement." I printed that too, just because it made me smile. The first week, they were furious. The second week, they were strategic. The third week, they got scared. Luke came to the back porch one night while I was cleaning tomatoes from the garden. He stood at the bottom step like a boy who had broken a window. "Dad," he said, "please. We can't find a place that will take the van and the equipment. Deposits are crazy. Marissa's business will collapse." I kept washing tomatoes. "You should have thought about that before you told me to move into Maple Ridge." He flinched. That was Marissa's wording. "Was your name on the email?" He looked away. "Yes. Then it was your wording too." His mouth tightened. For a second I saw the boy with Halloween candy in his hand. Then I saw the man who had let his wife call my home their inheritance. He said, "You're choosing paperwork over your son." I set the tomato down and dried my hands. "No, Luke. I'm choosing truth over pretending. I love you. But love is not a deed, and being my son does not make my life your waiting room." He stared at me, and I could tell he didn't have a sentence ready for that. I went inside. They did not move out by day 30. Nadine filed for possession the next morning. Their attorney tried to argue that the garage apartment had become their residence and that they needed more time because Marissa ran a business there. Nadine seemed almost cheerful when she heard that, because they were admitting in court filings that they had violated the agreement. The hearing was set for a Tuesday in Williamson County. I wore my navy suit, the one I bought for Luke's wedding. I hadn't worn it since. It fit a little loose in the shoulders. Nadine met me outside the courtroom with a folder so organized it would have made my old foreman weep with joy. Luke and Marissa arrived together. She had on a cream blazer and carried a leather notebook. Luke looked like he hadn't slept. He glanced at me once, then away. The judge was a man named Avery, maybe early 60s, with a face that said he had heard every version of family foolishness and was no longer surprised by any of it. Nadine laid it out clean. The deed. My sole ownership. The signed occupancy agreement, the extensions, the business prohibition, the unauthorized charges, the photos of the sign, the email. When she read the line, "Stop squatting in our inheritance," the courtroom seemed to shrink around it. Judge Avery looked over his glasses. "Mr. Mercer," he said to Luke, "did you send this email to your father?" Luke swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor, but the context. I asked if you sent it." "Yes." "And at the time you sent it, was your father the legal owner of the property?" "Yes." "Were you paying rent?" "No, sir." "Were you paying utilities?" "No, sir." "Were you operating a business from the property?" Marissa leaned toward her attorney, whispering fast. Luke said, "My wife was trying to." The judge looked at the page again. "So you were living rent-free on property owned by your father, while using portions of that property for business purposes, and then you asked him to vacate his own home so you could expand into it." Nobody moved. I could hear the old air vent rattling above us. Their attorney asked for 90 more days. Nadine asked for immediate enforcement with the standard move-out period, plus preservation of damages claims. Judge Avery granted possession to me. 14 days to vacate. No further business operations. No removal of fixtures. No harassment. No contact, except through counsel. He tapped the email with one finger before handing it back. "Family expectations do not override property law," he said. That line stayed with me. Outside the courtroom, Marissa walked past me like I was a wall. Luke stopped. His eyes were wet, but his jaw was hard. "I hope it was worth it," he said. I looked at my son, and my heart hurt so bad I had to breathe before answering. "So do I said. They left on the 13th day. Not peacefully. The sheriff's deputy was there because Nadine had advised it. So was Ellis, my brother, standing by the barn with his arms folded. He'd driven 3 hours from Alabama and brought a thermos of coffee like we were going fishing. Marissa cried loudly enough for the deputy to hear. Luke carried boxes without looking at me. They loaded the grooming equipment, 2 televisions, 6 chairs I recognized from my mother's dining set, and a set of copper pendant lights that had been installed in the apartment before they moved in. I said, "Those lights stay." Marissa snapped. "We paid for those." "No," I said. "My credit account paid for those." The deputy looked at the work order Nadine had printed. The lights stayed. That was the first time Marissa screamed. Not cried. Screamed. She called me cruel, controlling, a bitter, old man. She said I had destroyed my son's future. I let her finish. Then I said, "No, ma'am. I stopped funding the lie that you were building it." Luke looked at me then, really looked, and something passed across his face I couldn't read. Maybe shame, maybe anger, maybe both. When they drove away, Marissa leaned out the window and shouted, "You'll die alone in that house." Ellis took a sip of coffee. "She always this poetic?" I laughed for the first time in weeks. The damage inside the apartment was not terrible, but it was deliberate. Cabinet doors cracked. Deep scratches across the new flooring they had charged to my account. Shower valve broken. Holes where shelves had been yanked down. They had cut the camera wire above the exterior stairs, not knowing I had moved the recording box into my locked shop months earlier. The camera caught Luke carrying my father's tool chest out at 6:18 that morning. That one hurt. Not the money. The chest wasn't worth much to anyone else, but my father had carried it in the back of his truck for 30 years. His initials were burned into the side. He died when Luke was 9. Luke knew exactly what that chest meant. I filed the police report. A week later, the chest appeared on my porch before sunrise. No note. The van was repossessed in November. I know because the bank sent me confirmation that I was released from the account after the default process shifted fully to Luke and Marissa. Marissa's business page went quiet. Luke took a job managing inventory for a plumbing supplier in Brentwood. Not glamorous, but honest work if a man lets it be. I changed the locks legally. I repaired the apartment. I repainted the stairs. For a while, I thought I'd never let anyone live over my workshop again. Then a young man named Caleb came by from the Union Hall, 23, recently out of the Marines, starting an electrical apprenticeship, looking for a place close enough to work and cheap enough to survive. He reminded me a little of myself, except taller and better at saying thank you. I rented him the apartment at a fair price with a real lease. He paid on the first every month. He asked before parking near the shop. He brought my trash cans back from the road without making a speech about it. Sometimes family is quieter than blood. In December, I signed the final version of the Mercer Trades Scholarship Trust. When I die, if I still own this land, the house can be sold or used to fund scholarships for kids learning electrical, plumbing, welding, HVAC, the kind of work that keeps this country standing while everybody else argues on the internet. I left Luke a path back into the trust, but not a shortcut. Nadine wrote it carefully. Reconciliation, accountability, repayment of damages, and a year of consistent contact without financial requests. That may sound cold to some of you. It didn't feel cold to me. It felt like a door with a lock that could still be opened from the right side. Luke called me 3 months after they left. I was in the shop replacing the cord on an old floor lamp for Mrs. Hanley down the road. My phone buzzed on the bench. I almost let it ring out, but I wiped my hands and answered. "Dad? I'm here." He was quiet a long time. "I'm not calling for money." "Good." He gave a little breath that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so sad. "I found the old picture of us at Fall Creek Falls, the one where I'm holding that little blue fishing pole. I remember. I don't know how we got from there to court." I sat down on the stool. We got there one small excuse at a time. He didn't argue. That was new. He said, "I should have stopped that email." "Yes, you should have. I should have stopped a lot before that." "Yes. A year earlier, I would have softened it. I would have rushed to spare him from the weight of his own admission. I would have said, 'It's okay, son.' But it was not okay, and pretending it was had helped build the whole mess." He cried then, quietly. Not for show. I know my boy's real cry. I heard it when Roscoe died. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "Not because things got hard. Because I let myself think you were already half gone, like your life was just something waiting to become mine." That was the first honest sentence he had given me in a long time. I looked around my workshop, at the pegboard where every tool had its hook, at the old radio, at my father's tool chest, back where it belonged, at the winter light lying across the concrete floor. "Thank you for saying that," I told him. "Can I come by sometime?" "Not yet," I said. He breathed in sharply, but he didn't protest. "When?" he asked. "When you can come without needing anything except to see me." Another quiet. "Okay," he said. "I can work on that. That would be a start." We hung up without promises. People like neat endings. I understand that. We like the bad ones punished, the good ones hugged, the table set for Thanksgiving like nothing ever cracked. But real life doesn't always give you that. Sometimes the best ending you get is not a fixed family. Sometimes it's a locked door, a quiet house, and the first full breath you've taken in years. I still love my son. That never turned off. Any parent listening knows what I mean. Love for your child can survive anger, disappointment, even betrayal. But access is not the same as love. Money is not the same as love. Letting someone use you until there's nothing left is not love at all. It's fear dressed up in Sunday clothes. And if you're listening to this from your own kitchen, your own porch, your own little room where somebody has made you feel like a guest in the life you built, hear me clearly. You are allowed to name what is happening. You are allowed to keep records. You are allowed to say, "This far, no farther." You are allowed to love people without financing their disrespect. I spent too long believing a good father absorbs the shock so everyone else can stay comfortable. But an overloaded circuit doesn't become noble by refusing to trip. It just burns the house down. So I tripped the breaker. And for the first time in a long time, the light stayed on. Now I'll ask you, friend, if your own child sent you an email calling your home their inheritance while you were still living in it, what would you have done? Comment with a 1 if you think I handled it right, a 2 if you think I went too far, and a 3 if you think I should have acted sooner. And tell me where you're watching from, because it still amazes me how many of us, in different towns and different time zones, are carrying the same kind of story in our chest. Love does not ask us to disappear so others can feel comfortable. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do, even for family, is speak the truth, protect what we built, and leave the door open only to respect. Gratitude can heal what entitlement breaks, and a peaceful home begins when every person inside it is treated as someone who matters.